open, Vincent. Affordability. That's the word that's been buzzing around politics. In November, Democrats across the country won on the promise of reducing the cost of living. But it's not just liberals that are embracing an affordability agenda. Conservatives and libertarians are latching on as well. Jarrett Skorup is the Vice President of Marketing and Communications at the Mackinac Center for Public Policy, which appreciates the free market and criticizes government regulation. In this conversation, producer Sam Corey spoke with him about why he thinks unregulated capitalism can help free people from the burden of rising costs.
Make the case for the free market.
Yeah, I think the way to think of it that's practical to most people's lives is believing in competition rather than relying on government for a lot of things. So I think for some things that's really big things down to really small things. But I also think things that probably the right and the left might agree with for different reasons sometimes. If you think of a big issue in Michigan, housing affordability, a lot of the reason housing has gone up so much is government rules and obstacles. Most of our cities in most areas of our state, you can build one type of housing, one single family home, often with on a minimal lot size, with all these government restrictions that have increased that make it a lot harder to build. So I think people on the left would say we want more affordable housing so that people can live and we have more diversity in our communities. And maybe people on the right would say it just doesn't make sense to have those regulations in the place of business. But either way, for us, it's a government regulation.
In terms of your example, I mean, it would mean that instead of just building single-family homes, now we can build duplexes and triplexes and all different types of apartment complexes. And in building more units on a fixed plot of land,
right,
it can bring down the cost.
Whatever the market would demand. And I think sometimes the government obstacles came in place from a good place and sometimes a not so good place of limiting what types of people can live in different communities. But even then we think about healthcare. So the way to bring down prices in healthcare is increase supply. That's the way to bring down prices in most areas. So we have rules in Michigan that to open a new hospital, you have to go to a centralized board in Lansing and get a certificate of need provision, or even to expand the number of hospital beds. That doesn't make sense. There are many other states that don't have that provision. It limits the amount of medical facilities in this state. That raises costs. It encourages consolidation. Then other obstacles in the way in healthcare supply. So our nurses have to go through more regulation and education than other nurses. We don't allow nurses to come in from other states and get licensed right away. We don't reciprocate with their license. Same thing for teachers. Same thing for a lot of these different careers. We place obstacles in medical providers. So we're really obsessed with competition and increasing supply.
Yeah, and I should note that there's other ways to bring down the costs in the healthcare space. But you're right that in America, there are a lot of regulations that are preventing people from becoming nurses or doctors, and that constricts the supply and then therefore increases the price.
Right. And even the American Medical Association fought for 2 decades to not open any new medical schools in Michigan. And why did they do that? Well, it's because it increases their power, increases the pay that doctors get. There's a reason why they want to do that. From the market perspective, that doesn't make sense.
At the Mackinac Center for Public Policy, I've noticed that y'all seem to have become more either anti or skeptical of corporations, that there is something about the corporation that is actually getting in the way of free market enterprise. Is that a fair description?
I think we've always been skeptical of businesses and corporations using government power to block competition or benefit themselves. In the 90s, the Mackinac Center came out against a proposed corporate incentive program from Governor John Engler. Governor John Engler was one of the founding idea people for the Mackinac Center. That wasn't necessarily popular. It was a Republican idea then, but we've been consistent on that. We don't think the government should do select subsidy programs for corporations. It's gotten to the point where we're spending more money selectively subsidizing the big 3 automakers than we are bringing in corporate revenue from the business taxes any single year. We've always been consistent there, but I think the Republican and Democratic Party have moved in that direction.
There's No More Store Fund, which was subsidizing businesses to come here. And yeah, I mean, your center found that it really didn't create very much jobs. And it seems like people on the left and the right are in agreement that they don't want to be subsidizing corporations in the way that we have in the past in the state.
Yeah, for the last 20 years, we've been among the 3 or 4 most heavily subsidizing business subsidy states in the country. It has not helped lead to these jobs. And our study found only 9% of those jobs that were promised ever actually came into being. And so I think when you get that much evidence, eventually people all over the political spectrum are like, maybe we should try something different.
There are really thorny questions, and I mean that, really difficult questions about how to do things effectively, how to help people, how to build housing, how to create jobs, how to provide healthcare, and to do this well and to do it effectively. In terms of jobs, holding there for a second, what does the Center for Public Policy think is the best way to create jobs in the state? I think this is a hard task to do. I think there are legitimate criticisms about the government simply paying corporations to come here and try to provide jobs. But that does leave a really big and hard question, which is, how do we lure jobs here? How do we create jobs here? What's your understanding of that?
Government does not do a good job trying to target the quote unquote next big industry, or here's what we need to plant here in the state of Michigan or any state. I think the states that do the best, they have lower taxes, a flatter tax rate, as in they're not trying to pick and choose select industries or select businesses in the market, and they have lower, flatter taxes for everybody, and they kind of let the market determine that. There was a great news story recently talking about how a lot of what Michigan's done is tried to hold on to the auto industry. And then even people who are proponents of that saying, maybe that wasn't a great idea, because even to the extent we've done that, those jobs don't pay as well as X other industry. And I think there's a lesson in there, which is it's really hard to know like what states are going to grow and what industries are going to grow. And the best way to do it is get out of the way and don't try to determine what the right industry for the state is, and let these industries grow and compete with each other. And government should have a minimal role in that.
I want to move to housing. We're having a lot of affordability issues across the board as we're talking about. And you talked about housing. You talked about relaxing zoning laws, which I think a lot of different people are coming around to. And I should note that in places like Berkeley in Southeast Michigan, and they have done this, Oak Park has done this, Royal Oak is trying to do this. And there's pushback, but even people in the city of Detroit are thinking about doing this kind of thing too. When we've had bigger booms in terms of housing construction, be that in the 1950s or the 1990s, the government was around to subsidize the cost of that. They were there to provide a little more incentive for developers to build. I'm wondering what you think the government has of a role, if any, in subsidizing the cost of developing homes and housing units for folks.
I would say minimal, but to the extent that they want to do it, it should be focused on very low income housing. And actually, I wouldn't even subsidize the building of housing, which is kind of what we do now, which is like developers apply for grants and then they build certain housing in different areas, and then they get local tax breaks. I don't even think that's particularly effective. If you're going to do it, is you directly subsidize people by income and then let them go out into the market and purchase housing on their own. But really, this misses the big problem, which is the states that have low housing costs, even states that are growing really rapidly, limit the amount of zoning their local governments can do. So it does not make sense for local governments in Michigan to have maximum or minimum lot sizes that homes have to be built on, maximum number of parking spots or a minimum number of parking spots, trying to micromanage how much parking a development might need. Where I live in Midland, Michigan, it took 10 years to turn an abandoned school into a new apartment unit with 44 units. 10 years. They had that plan years and years ago. If you go back to the 50s and 60s, that would have been done in 6 to 9 months. There's too many regulations in the way in terms of permitting and reviews that slow down development. We got to make it happen a lot quicker, and we have to keep local government from putting up all these restrictions.
I think this point about regulation and restriction at the local level, zoning laws, is a really important one. But it doesn't seem to be, based on all the people that I read and talk to and who are thinking about this, the only factor when it comes to building and constructing more. A lot of folks in the state of Michigan, they want to build more housing. A lot of folks are in agreement, as you're saying. They want to relax zoning laws, but they also want to put government money towards building more. And in the past, when we have built a lot more, which we need to build a lot more right now, that has been a big factor. You said that you were open to this in a partial way. I want for you to expand on that a little bit.
So my father is construction, works from that industry. That was what I did, not so much on the home building side, but other types of building. And yes, you're right. There are high costs for workers right now. There are high interest rates. There are high material rates.
Yeah, those supply costs are so high right now.
And there's not a ton state government can do on that. But if you look at a 50-year period from Michigan, basically from 1960 to 2010, even when we were growing rapidly, we were a low housing cost state. We were lower than Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, all of our neighbors. And that's changed. Now we are a higher cost than Ohio and Indiana. We're not going to catch up to Illinois anytime soon. The reason for that, I think, is especially in Metro Detroit, the expansion of zoning rules and permitting rules that make it a lot more difficult to build and encourage single-family building. We can't do a lot on interest rates. We can't do a lot on the rates of workers in the short term, but we can at least make it legal to build and speed up the permitting process like Indiana does, where you say you got 6 months to approve a permit, and if you don't do it, then the onus is on the local government.
We could do that. The government could also incentivize the building of a lot of different types of homes, and that would mean that the government would say, okay, yeah, we're going to give you money, but you got to build an apartment complex, a duplex. You got to have a lot of smaller housing units. Mm-hmm. What do you make of that proposal?
Yeah, I mean, and I think a lot of that is what happens right now. The only thing I would say is anytime you put more requirements on builders, you slow down the process. I would just make the point, focus your regulations on what you really care about, which is usually public health and safety, not as aesthetics, not on looking at trying to micromanage what type of housing goes in. Let all type of housing go in, and usually that brings rates down. It has in Austin.
This is The Metro on WDET Detroit Public Radio. I'm Sam Corey speaking with Jarrett Skorup. He's part of the Mackinac Center for Public Policy, which is a pro-free market think tank. We're talking about how he thinks we should resolve the issues of costs rising in all sorts of sectors across our economy. Jared, big picture, I do want to ask you a little bit about essentially the rise of socialists and socialism. There are a lot more people who are interested in these kinds of things. Obviously, we saw Zohran Mamdani win, and he's now the mayor in New York City. What do you make of a growing popularity, a growing sort of tolerance and interest in socialism across the country?
Well, I mean, I think some of it is fewer people that were alive and actually living in socialist governments or communist governments in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. To the extent that when, quote unquote, democratic socialists get elected and say, I mean Sweden, I take it as an optimistic thing. And to the extent they say, well, I mean Venezuela or the USSR, I'm pessimistic about it.
But let's take Sweden. I think there are a lot of people who are interested in those economies and that style of living. And I guess what do you make of that? Because that wasn't so true in the 90s, but it seems to be a lot more popular now.
Yeah, I think it was the prime minister in Sweden or the president that told Bernie Sanders, please don't say we're socialist anymore. So, I mean, there's parts of it, like they have universal health care, which some people are favorable towards. But I also think they have a lot of market characteristics. They have way fewer regulations overall than the United States does. But they have unique things they have a pretty business-friendly climate. They're very open to oil and gas exploration.
When we talk about socialism, I think we mean more government action. I think people mean more government action in people's lives. And particularly with Mamdani, but broadly, they mean childcare, they mean healthcare, they mean really good public transportation that is possibly free. I'm not asking you to vouch for these policies. I know you don't necessarily stand for them. What I'm curious about is why you think that's changed over time. Why do you think there's been a bigger interest in that?
I think people are increasingly skeptical of government. They're frustrated over different things, and I think that has helped lead to the rise of the Trump administration. I think that's led to the rise of different groups on the left. And so from our perspective as a market-driven group, some parts of it are good and some parts are bad. We're very skeptical of the Trump administration on things like immigration and trade. And then some of the things he talks about where people really are, where the system really is against them, I agree probably with some of the more socialist people or some of the Trump people. But I get back to a lot of this is driven by the role that government has, where government is setting up these policies that limit competition, ensure consolidation. And I don't think the answer to that is to then have the government run things totally, which is the ultimate lack of competition and limit on people's rights and limits on people's choices. And we should move in the other direction, remove those barriers so we have more competition.
I was going to get to this later, but I am curious. Do you think that's true for everything? Like you think childcare, healthcare, some of the services that people need, it's not necessarily a choice for them. You think that the free market can and should solve that problem?
I think we should limit government help to the people who really need it, and we should remove the government obstacles that increase the expense of those. So let's talk about childcare. Across the state, there's heavily zoning rules that prevent childcare agencies from opening up. If you go back to the 70s and even the 80s, you could have these little mom and pop type childcare centers that were opening all over the place. and more availability of that. Those have been zoned out of existence. We've had the rise in the licensing requirements, limits on how many kids that per person they can actually watch, requirements for, in some cities, college degrees to even be a child care worker or owner of those shops in different places. That all limits competition. And to the extent that it helps public health and safety and its need to protect kids, we should do it. But we actually need to review and see if those things make sense. But either way, they all drive up the cost.
I'm glad you're talking about this. It's quite expensive. Childcare is a really big issue. It's costing families about $22,000 per year across the country on average.
Yeah.
You think the problem is that there's just too many regulations on childcare providers that wasn't true in the past, and you think that's the big change that is causing costs to rise to the degree they are?
There's a lot of different reasons. I mean, one of the things is we have more women entering the workforce. Two-income homes make it so that they have more availability to spend that money. But even simple changes like, okay, so if the government says we want to help subsidize childcare so people can afford it, instead of just saying you can only do, say, a government-accredited preschool or daycare center, open it up to whatever childcare options they want. So my wife, we have 4 kids. She had worked part-time. She was a teacher before we had kids. So if we were in this low-income category, giving her the option of you can take the voucher and watch after the kids yourself if you want. You can use it where part of the time you're using a nanny and part of the time you're working and use it that way. You can go into a childcare center run by the local public school, breaking up the number of options. We don't do that right now. You're very limited in the number of choices, which limits the number of childcare centers in the state, which economic theory is raises the cost.
We could just provide it, though. The state could provide it. There are a lot of people who are not poor enough to get it subsidized by the state. We could just make it available to everybody. If we pooled all of that money together, some people would say that that would bring down the cost. I'm guessing you don't see it that way.
It would raise the cost because if you see this in the same thing with like the universal preschool, you only have so many spots. If you add more kids going into that system, it's going to raise the costs, holding all things equal, because you only have so many slots. No matter what you want to do, even if you're saying you want this universal, you need to increase the supply. You still need to increase the number of workers, the number of centers, or else costs are really going to skyrocket.
Well, I don't disagree with you on that. I think everybody, agrees that the supply needs to go up. Right now, demand is huge and supply is not fitting the bill. Traditional economists would say this should be solved by the economy. And I think it's kind of a mystery to at least some people of why it's not by the free market. And so a number of things that some people are proposing is, well, let's just make it available to people and make sure that rich people are paying into it. That wouldn't raise the cost for everybody. It certainly wouldn't be more costly than it is for people right now. I mean, some people are paying $2,200 a month on childcare, and that's just unaffordable.
I would say cut out the middleman there and just don't subsidize the rich people putting their kids in. Let them go out and pay for it themselves, and don't do the government. Cut off the government subsidies to people that really need it, which is mostly what we do right now. But I don't think adding where we're going to do more subsidies and make it universal is going to bring down costs, and I don't really know why it would.
I want to talk a little bit about a bigger level problem that we have faced in this economy, which is wealth inequality. Wealth inequality in America just hit its widest gap in more than 3 decades. The top 1% of households owned almost 32% of all U.S. wealth in the third quarter of 2025. That was the highest share on record since the Federal Reserve began tackling household wealth in 1989. Do you think we should do a better job of taxing wealth in this country?
First of all, I would say that those groups of people are not all the same. As in the top 1% in 1980 is not the same top 1% today. It's a shifting group of people that move in and out of that. And there's also evidence that that shift happens more rapidly. Like if you look at the top corporations 20, 30, 40 years ago, they're very different than they are today. If you look at the top 1% of wage earners 30, 40 years ago and the families they're from versus today, they are also pretty different. So I take heart in that, which is we still have to some extent a dynamic, at least at the top.
What do you mean by that? I guess what's the relevance of that, of the 1% being different? And what exactly do you mean? I really want to understand that better.
So the Rockefeller family is not, if they're still the top 1% today, that would be a really big problem. That would be like this caste system. The Zuckerberg family was not top 1%, in 1980, but it is today. So there is some dynamism within those high wage earners.
Okay. So yeah, what you're saying is, listen, some people would see this economy as rigid, meaning if you're poor, you're going to stay poor. If you're rich, you're going to stay rich. But you're saying, no, that's not true. You're seeing who is rich in this country, and particularly who is the very, very, very rich, change. And because you're seeing that, you're seeing the competitive free market work?
Among the very wealthy. So
Okay.
there's a lot of dynamism among the top 1% of individuals and companies, which is a good thing. That means we still have a kind of competitive market. Now, I do think that there is some evidence it is being harder to move from those lower income to the middle class to the upper income. But I go back to what are the dynamics in play that are preventing that from happening. So if kids go to bad schools and then their parents also went to those bad schools and their grandparents went to those bad schools, it's very hard to break out of that cycle. If you have these regulations in place, if they don't favor the 1%, they still favor the upper middle class. So rules in place that favor certain medical facilities and doctors and these kind of upper middle class, the zoning rules that prevent people from kind of moving from one town to another, those are all things that do contribute to it. So I don't think I'm as worried about like the wealth inequality part. I am worried about the ability for people to move up to the middle class and to the upper class as fast as maybe they used to.
I appreciate that. I think liberals will look at that response and go, well, there was a time, particularly of the 1940s and 1950s, like the New Deal era, where we were expanding government. We also had a lot of, importantly, government investments in the economy, particularly, it was wartime and post-wartime. I think they would say, well, we should do something like that. We should use government to spend to take care of people's basic needs. So those are met. So people do not have to pay out of pocket for that. And then we should spend on certain projects that we think are useful. I know you don't see things that way. Why are they wrong, or why do you think that they're wrong?
I think they're wrong in the sense of looking at the big picture. And the big picture is we are spending way more money at the government level than we used to, but we're spending it in different ways. So I think if you lay out the numbers, like it's undeniable, the federal government has grown, debt has grown, state spending has grown. State spending has grown 40% in the last 10 years here in the state of Michigan. So then the question is, are we spending things in the right way that actually help get to what they want to do? And I don't think it is, because increasingly that money is going to the elderly. It's going to Social Security, it's going to Medicare, and it's going to Medicaid, which is aimed at the low income, but I don't think in a way that helps them escape poverty. And so I think that maybe there's some agreement where we can say, let's take that total spending and do it in ways that are better than we're doing now. Like, I don't think that we should have these programs that are helping upper middle class or upper class people just because they're elderly. Like, that money should be spent in a better way than we're doing it now. And I would agree that in some ways we were spending money better decades ago, but good luck, passing that in the current climate right now.
It's certainly very polarized. It's very hard. It's very hard for us to come together. I guess one of my questions that I think about in the state of Michigan, just to ground it a little bit, is in terms of education that you mentioned. We used to spend a lot more on teachers. I mean, in the 90s, we were giving them salaries that were the equivalent of like $90,000 a year on average. We don't do that anymore. Do you think we should be doing something like that again?
Let's take that point because it gets exactly what I'm talking about.
Okay.
We spend more today per student adjusted for inflation than we ever have. But to your point, not on teacher salaries. So where's the money going? Well, 40% of our payroll costs are going to pension costs of teachers. That is from past promises we made decades ago that we're trying to keep up with today. So when a pension system is sucking up 40% of payroll costs, it's kind of screwing over everybody. It means taxpayers are paying more money for less money going directly into the classroom. It means teachers' salaries are not increasing as fast as they would to make up for these past promises because we kind of screwed up how we did those pension investments. So it's like a part where both sides are right. We're spending more than ever for not as good a results, but it's not going into the places I think people want it to go to.
Jarrett Skorup is the Vice President of Marketing and Communications at the Pro Free Market, Mackinac Center for Public Policy. He spoke with producer Sam Corey. It's the Metro on WDET. We've been discussing what libertarians want to do to lower costs. Next, we'll hear the liberal perspective. That's coming up on the Metro. Stay with us.